Hello and welcome to Riverland Women, the podcast celebrating the incredible achievements and inspiring stories from women across South Australia's Riverland. I'm Kerry Lush, a podcast host, coach and former ABC journalist. Join me as I sit down with remarkable women who either call this region home or have a deep connection to it. On this episode of Riverland Women,
I wanted to meet him and to know what he looked like and was he into music or his lifestyle, and it's a human right. It's the right of the child to know where you come from.
Imagine knowing you had siblings you had never met. That's something Kat Dawson has thought about ever since she discovered she was conceived using an anonymous sperm donation. But what she never expected in those early days was the sheer number. She could have up to 700 siblings, maybe even more. Now she's on a mission to track down as many of them as possible, not just to connect, but to share some crucial information about significant mental and physical health concerns that they might not even be aware of. We'll cover that later in the episode. But first, let's get to know Kat, the person, the musician, and her life growing up in the Riverland.
I was born in Melbourne and my dad and mum met when I was quite young through his family, and we moved to Renmark when I was 3, I think, and then they got married when I was 4. They got married in the old high school. Every Friday night I would spend there because Dad was in the Navy Cadets and he ran that in Renmark every Friday night. So that was a really fun part of my childhood, going to the Navy Cadets every Friday. And then I grew up on 23rd Street. So I would jog around that block, and Dad worked on that corner of Renmarno's when Renmarno's was still part of operational in Renmark. And so we would take hot dinners down to that block down the road. You could walk there probably, but it wouldn't be a hot dinner by then. But we would drive down a hot dinner for Dad when he was on afternoon shifts. And that corner of that block, to me, I know it's like a beautiful business now, but that corner, it was had the haunted kind of rumors of being down in the cellar and stuff. So that's what I remember that corner block being, a bit spooky. But yeah, I grew up on 23rd Street and, ride my bike across the highway into town a little bit and go to my friend's house, and Renmark High School, Renmark Primary. And then if you want to go to university, you end up having to move. So that's eventually when I did move away from the Riverland, to try uni.
Right. Yeah, and what did you do at uni?
I got into architecture and French initially, but I'd had the gap year. And actually in that gap year, I had no French. And actually that's when my mother had died in my gap year. So she had gotten sick in my year 11 and 12. And so I had to just really, I think year 11 and 12 was really quite hard because nothing really matters when that is going on as well. Yeah, so after year 12, Mum had passed away. So that year I basically don't remember a lot of lots of reading and, friends bringing around food and hanging out with me, and just, which is a testament to the friends that did do that, because it's sort of being around someone that's sort of perpetually in despair is a hard thing to do, especially when you just can't fix anything for your friends. So that was quite a hard chunk of time. And then in that 2010 year, I moved to Adelaide and I started architecture. And after 2 weeks, I changed out of architecture. So I just did some art subjects and French and linguistics, and I started doing music. So my now partner was my housemate then. He had said, you should do some singing lessons and I'll do guitar and let's do some open mic nights. And so that was the start of music then. I'd never done a singing lesson the whole time I was in the Riverland growing up. I'd never done that. So my first singing lesson was when I was 19.
Wow.
And it was a good processing tool for grief, pretty much. Music and creative songwriting and music, just sound healing, we know that's a thing, and all of that kind of stuff. It was a really, really impactful tool to get feelings out, to move them. that's one of the reasons why I get questions like, can anyone sing? Can you teach me to sing? It's like, yes, you have to listen to what's coming out and then adjust it. And it's all muscles. So that I do believe that anyone can sing. And that's kind of where I headed after university, was into music and into studying music full-time at TAFE first, and then a university degree. I ended up going back to Melbourne, studying music there, and then finished that. So most of the time I'm a singing teacher currently.
A little bit different to architecture.
Yes. I love rearranging the furniture in the house, but yeah, it didn't end up being an architect.
Let's talk about your singing career. I've been to a couple of your shows, but yeah, tell us a bit about what you've done and what you've performed, where you've performed.
Yeah, it's been a bit eclectic. So when I was in Melbourne, I was in a jazz band. We were in the Ivy Stone Assembly, and we did bring the wine and food festival one year, and we went to the woolshed. I brought all the boys to the woolshed. So it was me and sort of like 4 dads, and they were all into the same music as me, from the 20s to the 50s, 60s, and jazz and blues and a bit of French stuff. And that was really fun. We were in that kind of jazzy sort of scene, and like the Paris Cat in Melbourne and the jazz festival down there and stuff. And that was really great. But after university, I wanted to do some traveling or have some time to write some music and do that on my own. So I, much to Dad's, I don't know, worrying, I got a motorbike license and I left to go to Indonesia for a year. So I think my brother had a lot of fun helping me shop for a motorbike before I left to practice riding around Melbourne on. But yeah, I just wanted some time, and you would, in a jungle, and you can live pretty cheaply in Ubud. So I was based in Ubud for about a year, and I had a friend there, and was friends with a music producer there, and we made an EP there of original songs. That was my first release. It's up on Spotify and stuff there.
Wow,
so that was really
what a
fun.
spot to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it was just a really like transient town. Ubud feels a lot like Renmark to me, but you never know who could be there. Like one day my friend messaged me and said, oh my God, John Legend and Chrissy Teigen are at the yogurt shop. Like, that's crazy. So just people pop up. Like I gave a couple of singing lessons to Sam Branson while I was there. And I played an opening show he had a band called Love Mafia, and they were playing at this show. So I opened for an act called Kai Mata, and she's an advocate for LGBTQIA rights and stuff in Indonesia, because there's a lot of activism that needs to be done to change things for Indonesian people there. So yeah, there was a really strong community of musicians in Ubud, from Bali, but also from Java and Indonesia and other areas of Indonesia. So it was a really strong community there. But then I came back to Renmark, and I was actually busier with gigs than I was in Indonesia. So it was sort of, and again, another supportive sort of environment where once people found out you were the person that did the thing, they booked you for the thing. So I was playing that summer on the Murray River Queen every Friday night. It was beautiful. Like, what a backdrop for gigs on a Friday night. And then, yeah, a few at the distillery at 23rd Street there, and the footy club and all that kind of stuff, sort of jazzy covers and some of my songs and things like that. And then when I moved back to Adelaide to study some music production. So you sort of study singing, and then you go, okay, well, I need to play an instrument to be able to sing and play. All right. And then I want to write stuff. So then I need to learn about some music production to be able to record some of this stuff, to be able to release or make demos at the very least, to get ideas down and all of that kind of stuff. But you can be a DIY musician and release things. The biggest song that I've got, Quarantine, that was mastered by AI, which is it's a little bit naughty in terms of whether people think that's proper or not, but it's out there and people are listening to it. So I did it as sort of an experiment too, to see what it would be like. But yeah, I recorded that myself and mixed it myself, and then had it mastered, but then put it up. So you can totally do things yourself even if you only started at 19, it doesn't matter. I had a student who was 60, she was 69 when she started lessons in Melbourne, and her ear was just so developed. She was like, oh, I really love this Indian music. And I'm like, of course you can hear notes between the semitones because you've been listening to music so deeply, it seems. She could hear all of these notes in between our regular major scale. Like it was amazing. So yeah, we were just working to help her voice catch up. So it's all muscles. But yeah, then studied music production. And then I was part of a show, which I think is the one you saw, the Tipsy Twain, the Shania Twain Fringe show.
Yeah, I saw it as
so
the cabaret show and the Fringe show. So at the two different locations. So yeah, that was a lot of fun to be in the audience.
Yeah.
It looked like a lot of fun up on the stage too.
The girls came up with it when I think it was like a New Year's Eve, and they're like, oh, we should do the Shania Twain and put it's like the theme around it is getting a little bit tipsy as we go. So we had those drinks that were named after Shania Twain, and I think the girls got her attention somehow on social media. I can't remember it now, but yeah, it was a lot of fun, and like I was just super silly character in it, and it was heaps of fun. And we had sold out the shows in the Fringe Festival, which we felt really lucky to do. So that was really festive. Like we had people dressing up and all of that. So that was great fun, really, really fun. But since then I've sort of moved into like DJing and things like that as well, but wanting to record a lot more of my own songs. It's just been a lot of other stuff has sort of taken my attention lately and time, a lot of letter writing and like collating evidence and putting all of that together, because it's pretty wild. So
let's get into that. Why are you writing letters? Why are you doing all this lobbying work?
So I always knew that I was an IVF baby, and that's at the very least where a possible donor conceived person can find out that they are donor conceived, via always knowing that they were an IVF baby, or because there are like 80% of donor conceived people currently still do not know that they are donor conceived. Donor conception has been used since the 50s. Like I've got siblings that are 41 at least that I know, anywhere between 20 and 41. So there are 40-year-olds that 50-year-olds that in the Facebook groups, there are 50, 60-year-olds that are finding out that why have they got this match on Ancestry or 23andMe, and they find out they're donor conceived. So a lot of adults don't know. And so if there are clues like your parents were quite a bit older when they did have you, they say that they struggled to have you, they say that it took a lot of years to have children, they used IVF, those are sort of maybe some of the indicators that you could be donor conceived. So that's when, usually through a fertility clinic, the parents have used a donor sperm or donor eggs to have their child. So one of the parents is infertile and they need that assistance. And that was sort of I guess kind of marketed as a bit of a miracle cure or a way to fix this. But I guess it complicates things quite a bit, because there is this extra 50% of DNA that's making up this human. So that has been quite hidden from a lot of people. So what happened in the 80s and 90s, up until you could choose your donor, is that they would be matched to the other partner. So my mum went in with her husband at the time, who's not my dad, because they got married when I was 3 or 4. But the man she was married to, was so tall and had green eyes and sandy kind of colored light brown hair. So they matched the donor to have those features. And that's how the doctors picked the donor at the time, not the parents. I think parents pick now. So so I found out I was donor conceived when I was about 11. So I already had dad, and he was raising me as dad. He will always be my dad. We already knew that we didn't have the biological connection, but that doesn't matter. So yeah, biology matters, but it also doesn't matter. There's two things that kind of exist at the same time. So mum had sat me down and said, well, the man you think is I said it would be easier if he wasn't my father. And so that sort of opened up for my mum to be able to sort of relieve that stress. And I was relieved. I was really relieved, because I didn't really get along with my legal father. I didn't really understand the connection. It didn't make sense. And that's another thing too with donor conception and relationships with our parents. Sometimes they are quite strained and we never know why. We feel it really quite a lot. There's like a guilt and a shame for having used it and just hiding this thing that is quite massive to parents. But if a child is told early on, it's not very massive to them. Like even for me, when I found out at 11, I told my best friend, and she said, "Oh, I thought that's how it was anyway." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay." And then it was, onto the playground. It was not a big deal. And so I pictured that there were multiple siblings. I pictured that we were like all different colors and children of the world and whatever, because I knew that our mothers were all different. So our mothers could be anyone. And that's the concept I grasped pretty early on. But I didn't have any interest like in finding out anything. I had my mum, I had my dad, I had my brother, and it didn't really matter at the time. But then when I moved to Melbourne, I was like, I should probably find out a bit more information. Maybe I could find out, who the siblings are, because mum had applied for a list. So there were 14 siblings on there. There was actually a letter before I got the sibling list that said there are 8 boys and 4 girls. And I thought, cool, okay. And I was number 4 in the list or something like that. But then when I got the list, there was one additional boy, or someone was taken off of the list and the 2 letters didn't quite match. And I thought, oh, that's just a mistake. But that's the first indication of things being omitted. There were only guidelines. There weren't laws around what clinics have to do. Even still, I moved to Melbourne and I wanted to find out a bit more information, and I thought, I'm right here. And then they pretty much told me, no, you can't find out anything about your siblings. You're not allowed to know who they are. You're not allowed to know who the donor is. And these files about you don't actually belong to you, and your mother's died, so you can't really access them. So I had to provide her death certificate and show that I was an informant on the death certificate. So I was waiting on laws to change, and it was about 7 years. So it was 2017 where this like world first retrospective legislation came in, where they removed the anonymity of a donor no matter when in the history of Victoria that they had donated. So that meant you could find out your donor's name. And so they followed adoption laws. So they would reach out to the donor, and if they didn't reply, they couldn't find them. They would use a service called Vanish to try and find an up-to-date address and everything, and find this person. And they'd be able to find out through birth, deaths and marriages if they had died or anything like that. So he was alive and we couldn't find him. So he couldn't put in a contact reference. So they had contact vetoes. So I had to sign something to say I wouldn't go after him and try to find him and contact him myself, or there'd be something like a $9,000 fine. And obviously we want it to go well. We just want the connection to go well. And we're just a person trying not to freak out our family, who I wanted to meet him and to know what he looked like, and was he into music, or what the case was about his like hobbies and his lifestyle and things he liked and didn't like. Like it's interesting, and it's a human right. Like it's the right to the child, the human right to know where you come from. Like, and that those set of rights from the UN are 35 years old. Like it's not new. And anyone that's upset about donors' anonymity being removed are likely a donor or someone that knows both of their parents, because people who don't know who their parents are tend to understand or be more understanding about this. By that stage as well, I had done DNA testing and I'd found one sister. So we were kind of in on this together, where I was applying for this information and she wasn't allowed to because she was born in South Australia. So she was born in Adelaide and conceived in Adelaide, which at the time we were all told that clinics did not send samples into state, because then they can because I'm not in the same jurisdiction as her. So the laws don't apply. They're all state-based laws. So the sibling limits for her are a guideline 10 family limit. When we were conceived, it's meant to be 10 families now, but that's per clinic as well. Clinics don't actually talk to each other. So if a donor wants to go clinic to clinic, they absolutely can. And they only find out about huge sibling groups after the humans have been created, pretty much. So I found this sister through DNA testing, And she was born in Adelaide and had a different donor code to me. So that was another indication of something isn't quite lining up here. You're meant to have a donor code that, even if it was a sample was sent from Melbourne into Adelaide, that should still be linked through the donor code. It shouldn't be a different number and different letter. So we were quite confused, but all we could do was start getting to know each other as siblings and see what common interests we had, and start building a friendship from there. And we'd actually met a year before that. We'd been in the same room, and I barely remembered it because she had said, I'm from Adelaide, this is my code. And I was like, that's different, can't be related. She thought we looked quite similar, but you don't necessarily have this thing where you lock eyes and you go, we're family. Like that doesn't happen, because you are essentially strangers. You've had a whole lifetime without each other. So it's square one, and you might not necessarily twig that you're meeting someone who is related to you. So we matched on Ancestry, and then and we met. So every step of the way, she was right there with me to apply. So I rang her the moment I opened the letter with his name, and it had an old address in like St Kilda, and I had been there like right near that address with a friend that year to go to like a concert. I think we were seeing like John Butler or something in Melbourne, and we'd walked right past that area, which is so strange because you just think he was probably hanging around there, like he would have been right near his house. It's quite strange to know that you could be passing this person that you've wondered about but never been allowed to meet or allowed to know. And then all of this was happening right as I was about to move to Bali. So it was a huge chapter changing. So I didn't really have a chance to stay in Melbourne and sort of find these things out in person in meetings with people from VADA, and find family members while I was there. And so I found someone who was his one of his close relatives, or a closer relative to mine. He wasn't easy to find, and he was alive. We couldn't find out where he was or what was happening with him. And so when I found his close family member, I was sort of saying, well, are you a relative of this person? And they said, well, yes. And I said, I'm a relative of them. And they were straight away, if you're a relative of theirs, you're a relative of mine. Who are you? And what are you asking these questions for? And they had no idea that he was a donor. He'd never said anything. He was someone who wanted to make money, which is also a terrible incentive to have. Being paid for genetic material, being paid for human body parts is illegal. And these human body parts and human material resulted in more people who then carry that DNA. Like that's absolutely shouldn't be monetized. Yeah. It's completely unethical. And so they were very standoffish, even to the point of wanting me to sign an NDA so that I couldn't go to media and talk about this whole story. They'd said to me that I can't turn this into a freak show, were the words verbatim. So for me, it doesn't feel like a freak show. It just feels like normal everyday life, because it's just the spot I found myself in, and I can't really help that. I just find out little bits over time. And so the next bit I found out was, I knew he was a pilot, but I thought, is he, he's been in a plane crash and now he's quadriplegic, and that's why we can't get in touch with him. He's not able to make communication with us. Like, what's going on? And I asked this family member this, and they just wanted to keep me at arm's length. They really felt like this horde of children was coming after them, and it was just me. And I said, a lot of them don't know. Like, there are so many siblings that don't know. And the ones that I have found haven't had any interest in finding this stuff out. Me telling them information has been enough for them, because they've got children of their own, they've got their own lives, we've all got jobs we've got to maintain and careers we're focused on, or there's a million other things going on. Like, it's actually too much to get to know the 10 siblings we know of. It's too much out of your life you can't spend an hour chatting to each of them each week. That's not physically possible to run your lifestyle and household and life. So there's a lot of fear around donor conceived people coming to find family.
You were about to head off to move to Bali. You'd made contact with this
Yes.
family member. Then what?
Yeah. So it was another like 6 months of just trying to message and ask sort of random questions and really just trying to present myself as a nice, well-rounded human who just wanted to find out stuff about family. Like there's sort of like all these misconceptions about like, what are you after? You must want something. And like, I personally know what it's like when you're left with inheritance but not a person, and I'd give all the stuff back to have my mum back. And so to me, I found that really quite insulting and really quite harsh, and like telling of this family of like, all right, we are quite different as people. And they were very cryptic about telling us, one day you'll understand, and I really want to sit in person and look into your eyes and tell you the truth. And it's like, what does that mean? I just want like, how is he? Is he okay? Is anything happened to him that's potentially genetic or like could impact me and my siblings? But then one day he went into the offices at VADA, and that counsellor case manager who I'd been working with for, close to 10 years said, right, I have to tell Catherine now, and called me, and we got on a Zoom call, and that family member freaked out and messaged me straight away. And so that was the message I got first from them, and said he has schizophrenia. And the worst moment for me was then calling my sister, who had suspected something like this, and that was her worst fear, and me telling her, and her getting upset. I can't get that sound and that trauma that she went through because of all of this long drawn out process of finding that out, when that could have been done in a really supported way. It was awful. And so then we told another sister who we had matched with on Ancestry, who had a completely different donor code from a completely different clinic, who had no idea that they were donor conceived until they did Ancestry. And yeah, who was also had a mother of a different race, so looked completely different to us as well. So you can't just rely on oh, hey, do you look like me? Maybe we're siblings. It doesn't work like that necessarily, because you've got your DNA from your maternal side that could completely override any of the genetic features of your face. So we told her as well. It was really quite scary going, what does this mean for me? And luckily, I mean, I'd done a music performance degree, but I wasn't like, into any kind of substances. Luckily, I'm a very big rule follower. And yeah, I guess growing up in the Riverland is good too, because if you get a bit rowdy, people find out about it. And I remember going out and having a bit of a wild weekend, just drinking after high school. And then my sister-in-law said, what were you doing on the weekend? I heard you were a bit wild. And I was like, what? Like, and she said who she heard from. And I was like, they weren't there. Like, so, you can't get away with anything. So luckily, yeah, luckily I didn't try anything, but
why? Because
yeah, like if
substances might have triggered that in you.
Yeah. And like my sister-in-law, Carol, has studied psychology, and, she was really supportive of me when mum died. So that support after having trauma is also so important in terms of psychosis or having a psychotic break and things like that. So I was very lucky in that situation to have really great support and family around when a big trauma, like that's probably the biggest trauma I feel like I've gone through, is losing mum so early. And then not having a mum for, she's been gone now for 15 years. It's like the little moments of not having her. And I'm just lucky because another sibling of mine, she lost who she knew as her father when she was 8, and then found out through a family member trying to hold that against her mother, saying, well, I'm going to tell them that their dad's not really their dad. And she overheard that when she was 16. So yeah, it comes out in family fights. And so if my siblings find out in a traumatic way, that puts them at risk of psychosis, just because genetically that stress can be a trigger. But also substance like illicit drugs like marijuana or hallucinogens or things like ayahuasca, if they go on some tour and want to try something with a shaman down in South America somewhere, if you're with a reputable company, I've seen on documentaries, they say, do you have a family history of psychosis or mental illness? Then no, you can't have this. And they're trying to keep you safe. But if you say, nope, I don't know. My parents never told me I was donor conceived and that I happen to be related to these people. Like, they have no idea. So it's really dangerous. And there's like a window of an age where you can develop it. Apparently for men, it's around 18 or so. And then I think in women, it's like in your 20s. So for me, it's been a relief to get into my 30s because it's quite scary. Like, you don't know your own mind. You don't know your own family. You don't know your family history and your medical history and what could happen to you. That's really nerve-wracking. So for me, I really prioritize, like stress management and doing things in your life that make you happy and do things that reduce stress. And I live pretty clean. I mean, I was made fun of for being a goody two-shoes and standing up too straight or whatever in high school, but now it's like, yeah, I'm glad I did that because it's good for my long-term health.
What else have you discovered about your donor father?
Yeah. There was also the fact that he donated under a bunch of fake names. So eventually he was willing to meet up with me, and that was just wild. Like, I knew I wanted to meet him and see what his face moved like in the daylight, just to have some reference. And I really, it was a really big watershed moment. Like, I just felt all these things slot into place. And knowing what your biological parents look like is just something that everyone hopefully can experience and does experience from when they're very small. But it's something else. It makes a lot of things make sense in yourself.
How did this meeting take place?
My sister's a bit of a sleuth, and so donor conceived people are very good at finding out things on social media and quite detective sort of in nature. And so, like, I'll have a match on Ancestry and we'll be able to find their social media within a few minutes. And like, I knew that I don't know if my brother knows this, but I knew that he had his appendix out before he told me, things like that. So my sister was able to find his care team in Melbourne, his mental health care team, and his carer and case manager. And so then I gave him a call and I said, look, I can't help caring about this person because they're my biological parent, and we've never met, but I can't, like, how is he doing? Like, is he okay? What is his life like? And, obviously he couldn't tell me very much because of privacy laws and things, but I said, I would be willing to meet him if he'd ever want to do that. And it took around a year of like communication. I said, look, I'm coming to Melbourne at some point. And he said, look, he wants you to know he's a really nice person, but he doesn't want to meet. And then, as like a last ditch effort, a week or two before I was coming to Melbourne, I reached out again and just said, I'm coming to town. If you'd want to meet, I'd love that. But if not, that's completely okay. And then just by chance, I must have got him in a window where his health was going quite well, and he was doing quite well. And so it worked out and we did meet. I've met him a couple of times, but then like some point last year he broke his foot and a few other things happened, and he hasn't really sort of been contactable, and I haven't sort of reached out since then. But he was happy to meet and very chatty and talking about ballroom dancing. And I said, do you like jazz music? And he said, no, you can't dance to it. So there was like banter, and he was pretty funny. Yes, he liked Shania Twain, so that was cool because at the time I was doing that show, and I was like, great. So there's some music that he did like, and some things like that. He was a pilot, and he said, oh, I'll take you up in the helicopter. And I was like, oh no, I'm more of a plane girl. Like, sort of, it went as well as it could have. And the case manager was there. There was a door at the front and the back. He could zip out if he felt uncomfortable, comfy chairs and comfortable lighting and a bit of banter. And that was the best I could have hoped for. And he was supported afterwards as well. Like, I left, it was at these sort of offices of the case manager and stuff. So really supported environment. And that's why I waited for the legislation to change anyway, so that donors had access to counselling. Because this thing, meaning us, pop up after 30, 40 years when they don't think that this is going to ever come back again, or they think they donated to science, which is a total lie, by clinics and doctors and clinicians. Like, it's used to make humans and used to make a profit. So we sometimes are the skeletons in people's closets. And so counseling should be provided to people who are dealing with that and thinking that none of this will ever come out. Because I'm not finding family through him doing a DNA test. It's everyone else.
So what was
donating DNA?
And what was probably something he just thought was a way of funding his way through uni or pub nights or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. It was absolutely to fund his flying lessons, which I like the idea of, that it wasn't just beer money. But one of the non-identifying information sheets that I've got, the date on it is his 21st birthday. Literally beer money to go in. Like, what else do you buy on your birthday, on your 21st? The other thing was that he rattled off these like 7 names when I was there. Oh yeah, I donated under this name, this name, this name. And I had contemplated taking in a recorder, but I just couldn't record him. It felt like moral compass wise, I just couldn't do it. It didn't feel right at all. So I didn't do that. And as soon as he said all of those names, they were out of my head because I was so shocked that he just said them all. One of them was Greek, and I was like, no one's, what nurse is going to believe that you're a Greek man? Like, that he's so, like, I couldn't believe that he just said all of these completely different names, and that a person in a clinic who might see him quite frequently would then believe his name was John one day and then George the next. Like, that doesn't make sense either. And the clinic, like the nurses, the team of nurses were not that big. So surely they would get to know someone over at least a few years. It was just really shocking. And one of those names was actually a person he went to school with. And he'd said that that person got him into donating. And then I later found out that that person, he had died in 1985. And so then if he was donating prior to 1985, maybe they were all his kids. And then after 1985, he assumed that name and just kept donating. So there's possibly a list where half of them are my siblings and other half are not. I don't know. I'm not really allowed to find that information out. But I had met up with one of his school friends who was a historian, and one of his classmates, and I had a coffee with him. I told him I was donor conceived and said my biological father's name to him, and yeah, I know him. Yeah, let's meet up for a coffee. And he was really, really warm and happy to share information. And that is such a relief and such a it feels like a rarity, because you're not treated as this other. Like, why do you want to know about him? You don't really know him. You don't know his life. You're not actually one of his children, when we were never given that kind of opportunity to get to know him from a young age anyway. So I met up with him and I said this other guy's name, who was the donor who died in 1985. And he said, oh yeah, that's an unsolved murder mystery to this day. It was just another bombshell that potentially he was a donor and he's got offspring that are then going to find out, oh no, he died in 1985. I don't think that counselor would then say, yeah, go Google him and you'll see, his face in newspaper articles where he was murdered. And then as well, like my biological father's family said that they knew this man and they don't think he was ever a donor. So they think that it was just my biological father, and he was someone who was never going to donate. So it would have only been my siblings on that list. It just gets wilder and wilder. And I just never expected someone to say, yeah, a name that is included in this is also an unsolved murder mystery to this day. Like, there was a $100,000 reward for information at one point. I've got newspaper articles about this man, and it just doesn't stop, the little bombshells of information.
You couldn't write a fictional book this juicy.
Oh, I've tried to write things down just so that I get it out of my head, because I don't want to carry all this around. It's too much to hold in there. And if I have siblings that I meet when I'm 60 and they want to know this information, I want to be able to hand them here's a thing, like, there's about 30,000 words so far. Yeah, I just it's just going to be a big journal for them to read if they really want to know how we got to this point of knowing at least now 3 different codes.
Wow.
So my donor's family say that there's no way he used all of those names and stuff. There's already 3 codes. And so him giving us this information may not be the most reliable because of his illness. Like, I totally know that. But if we're already finding 3 donor codes, there's already at least 3 names. And Monash IVF took donations under at least 2 names, and sent one of those codes into South Australia and into Queensland, which they've only just put in legal family limits. So my case of potentially having 700 siblings is because that's 7 names times 10 family guideline limits, and he went to 10 different locations is what he told me. So 10 times 7 times 10 is a potential, and that's assuming that every family only ever had one child. And I've got siblings where there's twins, there's heaps of twins on the lists. My list on my own code had 11 families, and then on the Melbourne IVF code that we've got has 22 families with 33 siblings alone on one code. So there's confirmed like 58 siblings. We had to start making an Excel spreadsheet because it was too confusing, like, to remember all of and it goes from 1983 is the first sibling to 2003. So it's quite a big span of sibling ages, and a lot of them still don't know. I've only met 12 or 13 siblings off of the loose list, and there's 58 confirmed.
So the potential 700 siblings could that could be on the lower end of the scale. There could be more.
It's still conservative. Yeah, it's still a conservative estimate because that just accounts for 7 names inside Victoria when they did send into South Australia and did send into Queensland to complete. Like, one family was made in Melbourne, and the eldest son was born with autism, and for his safety, for some reason, he was taken off of the lists. So that information wasn't circulated to other parents to say, hey, this is in the family somewhere. If this diagnosis helps you for your child and parenting your child, here's that information. They took him off the list and then made another 2 kids, but that family had relocated to Queensland. So they had sent samples into Queensland.
So if there's potentially 700 as a conservative estimate, what sort of impact does that have on the Australian gene pool?
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole lot of people that are going to need counselling when they find out their donor conceived, if they ever find out, if their mental and physical health is okay. I mean, I've been trying to get the Victorian Health Minister to tell my siblings because of the health risk. Like, there's not only schizophrenia, there's also a pre-cancer, a pre-bowel cancer condition that some siblings have found. And the last sibling I found, they said, oh yeah, I've been checking this thing for years. No symptoms, but here's the thing. He's got kids of his own. His younger sister has schizophrenia and has had schizophrenia since she was 10. So there's absolutely a genetic risk. And he goes and checks for this pre-bowel cancer condition. And I went and checked last year, and I would have had cancer by 40, the surgeon told me. So my siblings have already saved my life. And that really got me back onto messaging and emailing the Victorian Health Minister saying, you really need to get this information out to my siblings because they're 40 now. The geneticist letter says to them that they should be checking from their mid-20s. All first-degree relatives should be checking from their mid-20s, and they're nearly 40 now.
The other issue that obviously I can see is when these children of this particular donor start meeting partners and having children of their own.
Yeah.
There's like, Australia's a small place. Yeah. There's the possibility that there could be some problems there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just subconsciously, I had always dated people who were either born outside of Australia or had parents that were born outside of Australia, or were very, very clearly to me not Polish is what I knew my donor to be on the records. And he was confirmed he's Polish. And so, trying to stay away from anyone Polish. I mean, even siblings who, their mum is a different race, then that confuses it. You can't trust that. If you ask someone, are you donor conceived? They don't know. They can't tell me yes or no. They would tell me no and not actually know the truth.
It's not really a question you can bring up on a first date either.
I mean, I kind of would because I don't mind it. But I would more ask, maybe, did your parents struggle having you? Did they? Like, I would probably want the deeper questions. But I mean, my partner's from the Riverland, and I know his parents and his parents' parents, and I've seen photos of Chris Vine at, when he did the rowing when he was 18. He's a spitting image of Maddie. They're very clearly father and son, so that's a relief for me. And so it's terrifying, but it's not only the risk of dating your siblings. If one of my siblings who was born in 1983, 1984 had kids when they were 18, those kids could be going to school with our siblings that were born in 2003, and they could essentially be dating their aunt or uncle biologically. It doesn't just stop with this generation. And there's, my brothers had 3 kids, another sister's had 3 kids. Those kids they live in the same area actually in Melbourne, and they could very easily go to daycare, go to parties, end up hanging out with friends of friends, and very easily meet and not know that they're cousins. It doesn't stop with just siblings. And I'm still not allowed to know who they are. And the legislation in 2017 came in because of a woman called Narelle Gretsch, who died of an early onset bowel cancer at the age of 30. And we call it Narelle's Law, where a clinic may share medical information directly to the donor conceived person or their family. And that word may is the reason that the clinics have not shared this information with my siblings, because they don't have to.
You've found all of this out by going through, like, submitting your DNA to Ancestry. I guess that's a lot of people are a bit against, sending off DNA to be tested. And I would assume that's why a lot of people don't. And perhaps if
and
they,
that's fair.
but perhaps if they do suspect it, maybe it's something worthwhile doing.
Yeah. And so I know there's a lot of issues with people feeling like, oh, I don't want to give a company my DNA, all the privacy issues. And for me, my DNA, when I was separate gametes, before I was even an embryo, I was essentially owned by a company. I haven't had privacy since I was an embryo, since I was separate gametes in both of my biological parents' bodies. As soon as they went to the fertility clinic, I've been owned and not had any privacy. So I can't really relate to having privacy or knowing what it's like to have that, because I need answers and I need to get that information to my family more than anything. And it's quite a privilege to have that level of privacy and to be able to contemplate giving it up, because I just have to do it. And I have to get that information to them. It's my mother and my dad raised me to be a better person than to withhold information that could potentially save someone's life. Like, I just can't, I don't understand how people can do that. But I absolutely understand everyone and the general population's reservations with not wanting to go and have a DNA test, because you're giving that. It's not a full segment of your DNA. That's why it's so cheap. Running a full segment of your DNA to match with someone is about $600-700 with a NATA accredited DNA test. And that's what the clinics don't think that Ancestry and 23andMe is a big enough match to count my sister as my sister. They say it's not a NATA accredited DNA test, so why should we tell all of these other people? It doesn't, that match doesn't prove anything. When it's like when we match on 23andMe and a separate company, Ancestry. And then we did do the NATA accredited testing as well, but it's not a full segment of your DNA, and that's why it's so cheap. So I don't really know what they can do with your DNA and things after, but I absolutely understand people's reservations. But the thing is, if you think this story is wild and crazy and nothing to do with you, you can't really tell me that unless you've done Ancestry and you don't pop up on my list, because anyone's parents could have gone to Reprimand in Adelaide. And I know there's a sister running around Adelaide, or who was conceived in Adelaide, who was born in 1991 in July. And we don't know where she is, but she is definitely around. Could have moved anywhere. And that's the only other one in South Australia that I'm aware of at the moment. But unless you've done Ancestry and you don't pop up on my list, you don't know that you're not connected to this whole story. And it's likely not that uncommon to be part of a pretty big sibling pod.
When you met him, did it answer some questions for you? Obviously, you knew about the psychosis and the pre-cancerous bowel issue, but as far as looks or mannerisms or
yeah, Yeah. And I said to him, like, I turned my head and I ran my finger down my nose and I said, thanks for this. Because I've got a huge nose and his is a whopper. And he was like, yeah, you can really get your finger up there, and like made a joke. And I was like, bloody hell. Because that's one of the giveaways with some of the siblings. We have this great Polish nose. And he was funny, and he had this kind of like Robin Williams kind of glint in his eye, and he was a bit cheeky and stuff. But I also knew about him, and he's like kind of got this a bit of a entrepreneurial spirit, and maybe he just did a bunch of different things to make money because he couldn't hold down something steady or whatever the case may be. But I had some creative stories about him. Like, he bought a kayak, made a mold of the kayak, made 10 more kayaks and sold them all on the trading post. And he'd collect furniture and sell them, flip them on the trading post, or be wheeling and dealing and lots of stuff with furniture. And when I knew that story before I met him, but when I met him, it all made sense because I'm like that. And hearing stories is one thing, but like meeting the person and it all sort of being pieced together, it really did something for me. And I could finally sort of accept that I'm not actually going to be like, possibly there are parts of me that aren't going to be like my mum, and there are parts of me that aren't going to be like my dad. Like, I am very much like my dad, and that's the nurture. It's nature and nurture, and that you can't ignore the nature. And so there's bits of you that aren't going to make sense to your family growing up because they come from somewhere unknown. And if you don't know the donor, then you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. And so when you do meet them and it slots into place, it's such a relief. Like, I could finally accept that, yeah, I'm going to do a DJ gig on the weekend, and then I'm going to do some teaching during the week, and then I'm going to make some jackets and send them overseas, or I'm going to have a random idea and then make this thing, or then go make some music and do a bunch of random things, because maybe that's also part of my genetic makeup, and that's okay.
And what about the relationship with your biological father? Do you see that continuing, or have you found out what you needed to find out?
I'm always happy to see how he's going and like meet up with him if it's helpful and positive, or doesn't impact him negatively. I would be happy to meet up in Melbourne, because I was hoping that the connection between us at least maybe help to alleviate, even in some way, a little bit of guilt. And because he seemed to have a reoccurring thought and feelings about causing some harm. And he did think about us. He said, I realize I've sold my children. He said, I realize they've all gone to homes that I don't know where they've grown up. I can't help them if they have been in situations where they've been caused harm, and that has happened. And so he recognized a lot of kind of complex emotions I didn't really think that he had thought about. So he did actually think about us and actively feel bad for what he's done. And so that was quite hard to see as well. So if that can be at least a little bit alleviated by spending time together, like, I would want to do that. But also, I don't want to impact him in a negative way, and his mindset and his day-to-day life and things like that. So I work with his care team to make sure that, is it a positive thing? Is he doing okay after I leave? And all of that doesn't make the situation worse. So it all depends on that, weighing up a bunch of complicated stuff, really.
So many levels to it all, isn't there? Goodness. Well, Kat, thank you so much for having a chat to me on the Riverland Women podcast. I hope things go as well as they can into the future. I don't really know where to sort of sign off with this.
I know. Well, I guess we'll see. Like, I don't know if I have any other Riverland siblings. Like, that's always possible. I mean, I moved there from Melbourne, so who knows? It's just sort of like, who knows what siblings I'll find in the future. Who knows who's donor conceived? Maybe if people have an inkling after listening to this, thinking, my parents said something about IVF once, maybe they could consider ancestry DNA.
That was Kat Dawson. You can follow her on Instagram under her performing name, Evie Lucas Music. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow Riverland Women on Facebook and Instagram. You can also visit my website, thepodcaststation.com.au, to learn more about my podcast production services, coaching workshops or one-on-one sessions, family history recordings, and much more. Thank you for listening to Riverland Women.